Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Berechot, Chapter 8, Halacha 2, and we're going to be getting into the portion about the custom of drinking wine before the meal. Now, we know in Halacha 1, a lot of the issue was whether it's going to be the wine that's going to bring in the Shabbat, or it's going to be the Shabbat that's going to bring in the wine. Which is going to bring in which, okay? Now we're going to be talking about the custom of drinking the wine before this meal. Now, in order to really understand what's going on, I want to explain how Tumah works a little bit. I want to explain how it works with kalim, because you're going to be having a rabbinic thing with washing the hands, and that's going to be a rabbinic thing on Tumah for the hands, and then you have issues about kalim, like the utensils. And I want to just talk a little bit and explain a little bit about how Tumah gets transferred. Now, Doraita, people and utensils can get Tumah from an Av HaTumah. The Av HaTumah is going to be the primary source of Tumah. That's going to be someone like a Zav. We talked about a Zav earlier in Berechot, and that's a special kind of disorder. Another kind is someone who touched a dead body. That's Tumas Met. There are other cases, but it's also very, very serious. Somebody, for example, who touches a dead rat, that's also going to be. So there's a few different kinds of Av HaTumahs. And the idea is that if a person or a utensil, because we're going to be talking about the cup, touches a rishon, that's going to be something of the first degree from this Tumah, and that an item that was contaminated through contact with an Av HaTumah. In other words, that if clothing, for example, gets worn by a Zav, then that clothing becomes a rishon. And in the case of a person or a utensil that touches the rishon, they remain tahor and they do not get the status of a sheni. Now, only items that can become a sheni are going to be food and drinks. And a sheni will give Tumah only to something that can become a shlishi. That would be truma or food for the sacrifice. So when something that can become a shlishi, like truma and consecrated food, they can't pass on any Tumah to chulin food, and they can't pass it on to a person or to a utensil, okay? That's a very basic concept. There's going to be one exception, and the sages instituted an exception to this last rule, and they said that when you have a sheni and a rishon that comes into contact with a beverage from one of the 7 liquids, that's going to be water, wine, that's going to be honey from a bee, that's going to be olive oil. It's not going to be regular oil, it's going to be olive oil. It's going to be milk, dew, and human blood. Now, in that kind of case, the beverage will become a rishon, and it becomes where it has the ability to make Tumah to all foods and beverages. Now, keep in mind that we're going to be talking about kiddish, which is going to be dealing with wine, which is going to be dealing with one of the 7 types of liquid. And not only that, if you wash your hands and you're not drying them and you have water on your hands, you're going to be dealing with water. So this is also one of the 7 kinds. Now, there's another decree that tamei beverages is capable of transmitting Tumah to a utensil, but in the Doraita law, only the Av HaTumah can contaminate a utensil. But to make clear that this tumah is going to be rabbinic, the rabbis are going to give it a special leniency. And they said that when there's a tamei beverage that touches the outside of the utensil, only the outside surface becomes tamei, not the whole surface, not the interior. And also the handle is going to be treated as a separate part, and the lip of the cup is also going to be treated as a separate part. So if you have tumah and you didn't wash your hands and you touch the outside of the cup, the handle, the outside of the cup would become tamei. The inside would not become tamei. The contents on the inside would not become tamei. The handle would not come tamei. And the top of the cup, the lip, would not become tamei. That's going to be a decree. Now, you can see about this. There's a very famous council that they had about the 18 enactments. And the 18 enactments were where everybody got together and they were trying to come up with what can Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai agree on. And this was something that they agree on. So the sugya that we're going to be getting into is going to be focusing on the 18 enactments on the tumah of unwashed hands, and it's going to deal with this. And then you have another enactment about a person's hands are always going to be considered a sheni unless they have the laws of Netilat Yadayim. So just going on in life, one of these 18 enactments is that your hands are always going to be sheni. And that's why it's always very important to, do Netilat Yadayim. And the idea is that Netilat Yadayim is going to be necessary before you have meals where you have chulin. And if you have the hands that are unwashed and they're regarded as a sheni, they have the ability to make tumah to a beverage and make it a rishon. Now it's a little bit complicated. And that tamei beverage is capable of transmitting tumah to a utensil. The reason why is because of those two decrees that we were just talking about. So we're going to be covering really 3 of those 18 decrees about a vessel. Now, one of the ideas that's going to be coming up is that when you're doing kiddish and you have wine, this is going to be one of the core issues. When you have wine that gets poured into a cup, some of it's going to spill into the outside of the cup, and the liquid, because it's wine, is going to have tumah. And if somebody touches it who didn't wash their hands with Netilat Yadayim, because it's tamei, d'Rabbanan, it's going to be a sheni until it's washed, and the liquid can become tamei through the person's unwashed hands, and it can now have the status of a rishon, and it conveys rabbinic tumah to the outside of the cup. And we're going to have a case where basically Bet Shammai is going to be holding that you're not allowed to use a cup that's tamei, even if just the outside is going to be tamei during the meal. And the idea, the worry that Bet Shammai is going to have is that we're going to be worried that some of the liquid's going to spill onto the cup on the outside and become tamei. And these drops might get onto the hand, and that's going to make the hand tamei as well. And then that would basically undo the point of Netilat Yadayim, and the point of Netilat Yadayim was to remove tumah from the hands. So the idea is that using a cup that's already going to be tamei, the Bet Shammai is going to try that somebody's hands are washed before the wine gets poured. And the idea is going to be that he will not accidentally contaminate the cup with a liquid on the exterior with tamei hands. That's going to be a big part of it. So the Mishnah starts off and it says, Bet Shammai says, we first wash our hands for bread, and afterward pour the cup of wine and drink it. And again, this idea is going to be that, according to Bet Shammai, we're going to say the bread without washing the hands. And the reason why is because even if it has second degree tumah, they're not wet and the bread's not wet. And the idea is that, according to Bet Shammai, we proceed to eat the bread without washing the hands. Again, says the Haredim, because we already fulfilled the rabbinic obligation of washing the hands for bread. So you, under the formulation of Bet Shammai, you're going to wash your hands for the bread, as it says in the Mishnah. So you first wash your hands for bread, and then you're going to pour the cup of wine, and then you're going to drink it. That's what the Mishnah's order is. And we're gonna now keep in mind, in preparing this wine, they would take this wine and add water to it. So that's what it's going to be talking about, where they would pour this cup of wine. And the Gemara, of course, is going to get into all of these rules for this, of what's going on. Now, the Mishnah is going to say, Bet Hillel says, we first pour the cup, and then we drink it, and afterward we wash our hands for bread. Now, that's going to be what we're doing for kiddish today. We're following the rules of Bet Hillel. But we want to understand how it works for Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, so we can get a deeper understanding of the kiddish. We don't want kiddish to be just a ritual where we do it, we know how to do it, and it's empty of meaning. We want to understand, why is it the way it is? How come it's constructed that way? What's the point of it? And by trying to understand each component of what we're doing, like kiddish, we get away from religious ritualization, which is a very dangerous thing to get into. Religious ritualization is where you do it in an empty way. You do it like a robot. It becomes rote. You're not doing it with thought, meaning, or understanding. You don't get the depth of why it is the way it is. You're just doing it. And Judaism really doesn't want that, and the sages don't want that. And that's why we're going through the opinions of Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai to try to come up with an understanding of how this whole thing is being put together and working, so that you're doing it in a way that has more meaning for you. So the question that's going to come up from the Gemara is now going to start to get into the reasoning behind this. And, again, you want to pay attention to how this works, because you want to get away from, as much as possible in your life, ritualization, where you're doing it because you do it this way, but you don't have an understanding of the meaning behind it, and how come it is that way, and what are you doing it that way for? Why? You don't understand the why of something. You understand what to do, right? That's the point of ritualization. You do this. What is it? It's like this. But you don't understand the why you do it. And that's what is so important to really dig into. And that's why we need to look at the minority opinion like Bet Shammai to help us understand what's the worry. So the Gemara says, what is Bet Shammai's reason for this rule where you're going to wash your hands first before the bread? And you're going to do this, and then they're going to pour the cup of wine. So, in the formulation of Bet Shammai, you're going to wash your hands for bread first. Then you're going to have the cup of wine. You're going to drink it, and then you can just dig into the bread, right? And then go do hamotzi. The formulation of Bet Hillel is saying that you're going to pour the cup of wine, drink it, and then you're going to wash your hands for bread, and then you're going to do hamotzi with the bread. So the order of this is pretty relevant. Now, the Gemara is going to say the answer for Bet Shammai's reasoning. It says, so that liquid on the cup's exterior will not contract Tumah from his unwashed hands. And the Gemara says, and in turn transmit Tumah to the outside surface of the cup. Now, I want to point out something that comes up in the Mishnah and Kalim, and it's a recurring theme through there. Bet Shammai has a rule that you're not allowed to use a cup where the exterior is tamei. And Bet Hillel has where you're allowed to use a cup where the exterior is tamei, but not where the interior is tamei. Everybody agrees that you can't use a cup where the interior is tamei. Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai, no disagreement. But Bet Shammai is saying that no, if the cup on the outside is tamei, also you can't use that. Bet Hillel says you can. So in order to do this formulation, they're requiring that you have to do Netilat Yadayim before you put the wine so that you don't transmit Tumah to the cup. That's going to be the idea. And, again, the idea is that Bet Shammai holds it's forbidden to use a cup that is tamei just on, even on the outer surface. And the reason is that they're worried. Why is that? They're worried that some of the liquid is going to spill into the cup's exterior and become tamei. And some of these drops might come in contact with the hands, and that would also make the hands tamei. And then what's the point of it? Well, there's no point of doing Netilat Yadayim to remove the tumah of the hands because they became tamei from the exterior of the cup. That's going to be the idea. So that you basically recontaminated yourself. That's the point. And the formulation that Bet Shammai is going to be proposing is going to be one where he's not going to accidentally contaminate the cup with liquid on the exterior with tamei hands. That's why Bet Shammai is requiring that the hands be washed before the wine is poured. Again, let me point out why. The reason is that they're trying to stop an accident where, with the exterior, with liquid on the exterior with tamei hands, and then you would end up contaminating the cup, okay? And then you can't use a tamei cup. So in order to get around that, they're saying that you wash your hands before the wine is poured, and then everything is going to be okay. That's going to be the idea. And the Gemara is going to say, and what is Bet Hillel's reason for ruling that we pour the wine first and then we wash our hands? And the Brisa explains that Bet Hillel holds that the outside of the cup may always be tamei and is unnecessary for one to wash his cup or his hands before pouring the wine. So the idea with Bet Hillel does not have a prohibition to use a cup where the outside surface is tamei and the inside surface is going to be tahor. Again, everybody agrees that if the inside surface is tamei for the cup, you can't do it because you're going to be pouring wine into it and you're going to be making the wine tamei. And then if you're sharing the wine or you're using, if you're taking it from a bottle and you're pouring into a tamei cup, you've created a stream. And then the rest of the bottle, even if you just poured a cup for yourself, the rest of the wine in the bottle will be tamei. And if you pour it out to a Goan, you can contaminate him. And then he has an issue with trying to eat truma. And he has an issue with trying to do sacrifices and kodshim and things like that. So there's a lot of issues. So everybody agrees that if the inside of the cup is tamei, it's a no-no. You're not allowed to use it. Disagreement is, what about the outside of the cup? And you know that Bet Shammai says no. And the reason why Bet Shammai says no is because you can have a case where you can accidentally, the liquid can come out from the wine, and if the outside were to be tameh of the cup, and your hands, you just did Netilat Yadayim, and some of these drops came out and it touched the outside of the cup and it also touched your hand, well, now there's a liquid there that connected between the outside of this utensil and your hand, and it would have recontaminated your hand and made your hand tameh. That is another way that this can happen. So Bet Shammai is holding that you can't use a cup. You have to make sure the cup is not, the exterior is not tameh. And so that, if you did Netilat Yadayim according to the formulation of Bet Shammai, and some of this wine is on the outside of the cup and you touched it, and the outside of the cup would be tameh, and then you used it, well, then you made your hands tameh, and you got Tumah from the cup. Okay, that's going to be what they're trying to avert. Again, this is a Derabanan thing. This is not a Deraita thing. This is a Derabanan thing. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to safeguard in a meal to make sure that when you're handling food, that you didn't inadvertently turn your hands into a shani and touch truma and other kinds of food, because you might have kohanim at the table. So the Brisa now is going to hold why Bet Hillel holds that the outside of the cup may always be tameh. So under the formulation of Bet Hillel, why is the cup allowed to always be tameh? And by the way, if the outside of the cup is always going to be tameh, then you don't have to wash your hands before you pour the wine. So again, that's going to be the big idea between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai here. And I'm going to read the note by the Haredim to explain it. So Bet Hillel, as we know, doesn't prohibit the use of the cup from the outside surfaces where it's tameh, and the inside is tahor. And the reason why, says Haredim, is because in the view of Bet Hillel, it's uncommon for the drops to spill from the outside of the cup onto the exterior. And since there's no concern that the cup will transmit tumah to one's hands during the meal, a utensil that is tameh on the level of a shani cannot directly make a person's hands tameh. And so it would be permissible in Bet Hillel's view to pour the cup before Netilat Yadayim, even though this might result in the exterior cup becoming contaminated. And in fact, says the Haredim, Bet Hillel maintains that one must pour and drink the cup before Netilat Yadayim, and if one were to wash the hands, and do it first, as Bet Shammai is requiring, there's a possibility that the hands would come in contact with the cup while it is still partially wet. And the cup is allowed to be tameh according to Bet Hillel. Now, if the cup is allowed to be, outside of the cup is allowed to be tameh according to Bet Hillel, and you washed your hands under the formulation of Bet Shammai first, and your hands weren't 100% dry, and you touched the exterior of this tameh cup, well, then you have a problem. And this would cause the person's hands to become tameh, because there's liquid that's on their hand, and it would nullify the Netilat Yadayim. And this is, by the way, a problem that you have where you're going to take from part of Bet Shammai and part of Bet Hillel. You're going to make a big mess, and we never allow that. If you were at this time going to take by Bet Hillel, you take everything of Bet Hillel, and if you take by Bet Shammai, you take everything of Bet Shammai. But if in this case you mixed it up, and we have a Mishnah that says, only a fool goes in darkness, and that's not a Mishnah, it's a Gemara explaining the Mishnah, but, a person who's taking the leniencies of Bet Hillel and the leniencies of Bet Shammai is called wicked, right? So if you took the leniencies of Bet Hillel and you were using an outside of the cup that was tameh, and then you're going to take the leniencies of Bet Shammai and you're going to take this order and you're going to wash your hands first, but you didn't dry them first, and you touched the outside of this cup, well, you ended up doing what nobody wanted to be done, which is to make your hands tameh. And it undoes the point of Netilat Yadayim. So you can't mix and match the points of Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. And you can see in this case what would happen if you do mix up Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. And that's one of the problems. If you washed your hands first and you use a cup where the outside is tameh, and we know that washing the hands first is by Bet Shammai and using the tameh cup is by Bet Hillel, and you mix it all up, well, you can end up where you made your hands tameh. And the idea, says the Haredim, is that we're not concerned about someone's hands being moist from Netilat Yadayim, and it's capable of contracting Tumah from the cup during the meal, because it's prohibited to eat bread where the hands are not properly dried. So that's a note for your own avoda, right? When you're doing Netilat Yadayim before you have hamotzi, you have to make sure your hands are totally dry. Why would that be? Well, if you're touching something like the outside of a tameh cup and you accidentally made your hands tameh again on a sheni level, and then you're touching the bread, well, you might have accidentally made the bread tameh. Perhaps there's a tameh cup that's there and it's in the way, and you just absent-mindedly move the cup and the vessel, and then you're doing it and your hands aren't 100% dry and you're touching the bread. Well, you made the bread tameh because you touched the vessel, and the outside of the vessel is going to be tameh. So you want to make sure that your hands are always going to be dry. The Gemara is going to give another point for this, and the other point that the Gemara gives, it says like this. It says, another point. The law is that washing of the hands should not be performed except in proximity to the blessing over the bread. Now, this is another really key point about the difference between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. Now, what Bet Hillel is doing, the formulation of Bet Hillel is a cleaner formulation because there's no hefsek between the washing of the hands and eating the bread. And in the formulation of Bet Shammai, it has it where there's a space between where you're doing Netilat Yadayim and where you're eating the bread. Now, the Gemara is going to be pointing out, says the Bnei Moshe, that it's improper to pour the cup of wine after Netilat Yadayim, as Bet Shammai is holding, because this would have a hefsek and an interruption between Netilat Yadayim and the blessing of the bread. So that's going to be a key point on this. Now, I want to point out something the Chazan Ish says in Yadayim 7:11. Chazan Ish says that this basic principle between the respective views of Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel were applicable only in former times when the laws of Tumah and Tara were observed. And the Chazan Ish writes, nowadays, we and our food are all presumed to be tameh in any case, and that would render this irrelevant to any concerns regarding the Tumah of the cup. And that's going to be the idea. Now, I want to point out what the Or Chaim says in 166. And it says that, nevertheless, Bet Hillel's second reason that Netilat Yadayim must take place immediately before the meal holds true even today. In other words, the idea is that you don't want to have a hefsek. Now, I want to point out that in the German community, particularly in Frankfurt am Main, but the old German custom is to perform Netilat Yadayim before you do kiddish on Shabbat, and also the custom was where they were sitting. The kiddish would be where they were sitting on Friday night, but also the German custom. The traditional German custom is to do the Netilat Yadayim in the formulation of Bet Shammai. Why? That's just the custom of the place. So the Gemara is going to present an alternative explanation to this dispute between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, according to which everyone agrees that it's forbidden to use a cup whose exterior is tamei. So there's going to be a case where everybody agrees that if the exterior of the cup is tamei, everybody agrees. And what's going to be this case? So the Gemara reads that Rabbi Beurim says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the view of Bet Shammai accords with that of Rabbi Yossi, and the view of Bet Hillel accords with that of Rabbi Meir. For we learned in a Mishnah there, this is talking about in Kalim 25:7, and this is talking about a Mishnah that's talking about that all the utensils are deemed to have an independent outside surface and an independent savita place, and these sections of the utensil are going to be considered to be distinct in regard to the transmission of rabbinic Tumah. So an example of this would be where, I remember from in Kalim, they're talking about a type of cup, and these types of cups would be ceramic, and they used to make this type of cup where the outside would be like a normal type of cup, except they would put 2 finger grooves inside on the outside of the cup. So it would be very easy to hold this kind of hot cup that has like hot surface, hot liquid inside. It's ceramic, and the finger grooves are right there, so you can hold on to it easily without it slipping and falling, and it's nice and comfortable to use and hold. It's ergonomic. But in terms of a savita place, you can have it where the outside of the utensil can have a different level of tara versus these finger grooves. And so the finger grooves can have one part, and it could be either tamei or tahor, and the outside of the cup that has no finger grooves would have a different status. So it can get split up into many different segments depending on how the kalim is going to be done. Now, we know that in the Mishnah, says the Gemara, Rabbi Meir says we treat the handle of a utensil as distinct from the exterior surface for cases involving either tamei or tahor hands. So in the Mishnah over there, says the Haredim, they're saying that the handle is going to be considered separate from the exterior of the utensil, both when the hands are going to be tamei or even when they're going to be tahor. So that if, in the case like this, also like with those ceramic cups with the finger grooves to hold on to it, if the hands are tamei and the liquid on the outside surface is going to be on the utensil does not become tamei if he holds it by the handle. And we're not concerned that he might, or by the way, if he holds it just in those finger grooves. So the idea is that we're not worried, according to what Rabbi Meir is saying, we're not worried that he might accidentally touch the liquid and contaminate it. And then you would convey Tumah to the outside of the utensil. And similarly, if the hands are going to be tahor and wet, and the outside of the utensil is tamei, the hands do not become tamei if he holds the cup with the handle, and we don't suspect that the hands contract Tumah from the outside of the cup through the liquid that's on it. That's going to be the note by the Haredim about this to explain it. And the idea is that we treat the handle of the utensil as a distinctive part from the exterior. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Meir says for either tamei or tahor hands, and that's going to be talking about this other part of the cup like the handle or the finger grooves. And the Gemara continues and says, Rabbi Yosa says, the rabbis did not state this leniency except for cases involving tahor hands and a tamei cup. And the Rosh has a good commentary on the Mishnah there in Kalim, and here's what he says. He says that the handle is treated as distinct from the exterior of the cup only in the case where the person's hands are tahor and the cup is tamei. And in that setting, we are not worried about the person accidentally touching the outside of the utensil because the hands are generally tahor, and they would have caution because they know that their hands are tahor, and they're just going to hold on to the handle and try to avoid contaminating them. That's going to be the idea in this special leniency about why the handle is going to be so special. And the idea here is that, according to Rabbi Yosef, there's no way for a person with tamei hands to hold a wet utensil without contaminating it. And Bet Shammai is going to follow this view in the ruling that one must wash the hands before pouring the wine. Rabbi Meir is saying that if someone with tamei hands grasps the outside utensil by only the handle, the utensil stays tahor. And this coincides with Bet Hillel's view that one may delay washing the hands until after the cup of wine is poured. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about the requirement for Netilat Yadayim, and the idea is that I want to talk a little bit about Netilat Yadayim before we get into this. Okay, so the sages included the Tumah of unwashed hands among the 18 enactments because hands are always out there touching things, are always active. And this could be where, a person accidentally scratches his head, or he was sweating and he wipes the sweat from a body part, perhaps like the back of his neck. Perhaps he's very sweaty and he wipes his chest or his neck or something, or his arms. And then if he were to touch truma, it could be a problem. So they wanted to protect truma. Now, there's a direct obligation to protect sacred foods. It says you shall guard it. So there's a basis for the sages to put in fences to make sure that we are guarding this, because this is a requirement. It says you shall not contaminate it regarding holy foods, and you shall not contaminate it, and you shall guard it, so that you always have an obligation to put fences around it, so to speak. So this is the idea of where this is coming up to. And the rabbis are declaring in this case that unwashed hands are always going to have the status of a sheni, because there's always a suspect that you were touching something that was tamei. Maybe you touched your shoe, or you touched your leg or something, or you were touching your arm, or you had a scratch somewhere. You had a scratch on the back of your head, and you were learning, you didn't accidentally scratch the back of your head. Okay, so now your hands are going to have issues. So they always said that, okay, it's always going to be deemed to be a sheni. So therefore, anybody who's going to be anywhere near truma, especially with being around the temple and going to be around like holy foods, they have to wash their hands before they start doing anything to remove tumah. And they're putting up a fence. By the way, it also says the Rashi about this, is ensuring that any dirt also gets removed. But the basic part about tumah is going to be a spiritual thing. It's not necessarily a matter of cleanliness. It's a thing of spiritualness. And the idea is that, well, why would you be worried about washing your hands on a sheni if you're going to be dealing with hulin food, right? Because hulin food doesn't get tumah from a sheni. So what's the point if you're not a Kohen to perform Netilat Yadayim before a meal if you're going to be having hulin? And that's going to be a point. And the reason that you're going to be having this system for Netilat Yadayim, even if you have hulin, it's so that the Kohanim who do not eat truma should not get used to washing their hands. That they should be used to washing their hands before eating. So, unlike Netilat Yadayim for truma, which would apply to any truma, the Netilat Yadayim for hulin applies only to bread. And the other reason that you have Netilat Yadayim for non-truma food, says the Tosafot, is that rinsing one's hands before a meal is desirable on its own sake because of cleanliness. And the other idea would be that eating with clean hands is a form of holiness, and the Jewish people are supposed to be holy. And another reason that's applicable even today is that they left the decree intact so that when the temple is rebuilt, people will already be used to eating in some state of tara and used to washing the hands. So there's a few different reasons why. I mean, a big reason why is that if it just becomes the custom that everybody always washes their hands before they're having bread, then certainly the Kohanim will not forget it and will be used to doing it, and they will be accustomed to washing their hands before they eat, just in case the Kohanim are going to be eating truma. So the Gemara is going to continue, and the Gemara says that Rabbi Yossi says in the name of Rabbi Sabsai and Rabbi Chia in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, for the sake of being able to separate challah in a state of tara, and for the sake of performing Netilat Yadayim before a meal, a person must walk up to 4 mil. Now, that's going to be really, really mystical, because we know that 4 mil was going to be the amount of time where we're talking about the stars coming out in chapter 1, Halacha 1. Now, when we're talking about 4 mil, which is going to be about 2 or 3 miles, that's going to be a case where the dough is kneaded in a state of tara, and if he would not need to travel further than that distance, he can knead the dough while it's tamei and separate the challah portion from the tamei dough. And with regards to Netilat Yadayim, if one does not know of any water that's available within 4 mil distance, he may eat without washing. And the Haredim says that if one does not know that of available water within the 4 mil distance, he may eat without washing, using instead the expedient of wrapping the hands in cloth to avoid coming into direct contact with the food. Now, why does that matter? Well, that's going to be bringing up a point. Why not just always eat in a case where the Kohanim are always wrapping their hands to protect the food? Why do we need to worry about, if we're Kohanim, and I'm not, but if we're Kohanim and we're worried about our hands and contaminating food, why not just always eat with gloves on? And anyway, that's going to come up and get resolved, but the Gemara is going to qualify this rule about the 4 mil. And Rabbi Abahu says in the name of Rabbi Yossi and the son of Rabbi Hanina, this was stated only in cases where the distance to be traversed is located ahead of him, in other words, toward the direction he is headed. But if it's located behind him in the opposite direction, we do not trouble him to turn around. So Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Hanina, is teaching that the 4 mil requirement in these cases are meant only for a traveler to continue along a route that he is traveling anyway, And although the traveler would prefer to knead the dough and eat the meal right then and there, the rabbis required that he continue walking up to an additional 4 mil for the sake of doing it the right way. That's going to be the ideas. So there's some differences between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi on this point. And the Bavli is going to hold that one is never required to reverse direction. Anyway, the Gemara is now going to have a question about this law, and the Gemara says, concerning guards of gardens and orchards, whose responsibilities include sometimes irrigating the land. The Gemara is going to ask, what do you do for them if their involvement in the work makes it difficult for them to go and get water for Netilat Yadayim before they eat? And is the water going to be viewed as being ahead of them, since they will anyway leave at some point to get water to irrigate the plants? Or is the water going to be viewed as behind them, since they are currently preoccupied with other matters like eating? So that's going to be a case. And the Gemara is going to answer that, and it's going to say, the Gemara responds, learn the answer from the Mishnah. A woman may sit on the ground, separate her challah, and recite the blessing for the mitzvah, even if she's unclothed, because she's able to cover herself when she sits on the ground, but is not permitted in the case of a man. The Gemara answers, is this woman not sitting inside her house where she will eventually clothe herself? Certainly she is. The Gemara says, but you still say that we do not trouble her to get dressed in order to recite the blessing in a more appropriate manner. The Gemara says here too, with regards to the caretaker of a garden or orchard, we do not trouble him to stop what he's doing in order to go and get water for Netilat Yadayim. Now, the Gemara is going to continue on this with Mayim Achronim and Netilat Yadayim. And the Gemara says, a Brisa taught the water with which we wash our hands before the meal, that's going to be Netilat Yadayim, is going to be elective, while the water that we wash on our hands after the meal is obligatory. And the Gemara says, nevertheless, for the first waters, that's Netilat Yadayim, one washes and interrupts, but for the second water, one washes and does not interrupt. The Gemara is going to try to get to this last part of the Brisa. Then the Gemara is going to say, what is it referring to when it says one washes and interrupts for Netilat Yadayim? Because didn't we just learn that you're not supposed to have any interruption before doing Netilat Yadayim and doing the blessing on the bread? In other words, that you're supposed to do Netilat Yadayim, not allow any hefsek at all, and go right away to the blessing of the bread. What's it talking about? The Gemara says, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha says, it means for Netilat Yadayim, one washes each of his hands and repeats the washing with an interruption in between. For Mayim Arhonim, though, each hand is washed only once. In other words, there's talking about this double washing of hands. You can see that in Yadayim 1:1. And this first washing of Netilat Yadayim is going to purify the hands from the Tumah. And the second time you wash it is going to purify the first water that became contaminated on the Tumah hands. That's why we use the special cup to wash our hands, and we rinse it many times, is to wash the water off. That's the idea. And the Gemara now is going to talk about the idea of Netilat Yadayim being elective, because that seems very, very surprising. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzhak asked, the Brisa, just as interpreted, states that Netilat Yadayim, one washes each of the hands and repeats the washing, and yet you say this is only elective? In other words, what this is showing, if anything, Netilat Yadayim should be considered to be more stringent than Mayim Achronim, and the Gemara actually leaves this unanswered. So the Sedei Yeshua says that an additional objection is presented in a parallel sugya in Yerushalmi Chala, and if we require somebody to travel 4 mil to get water for Netilat Yadayim, how can the Brisa call it elective? That's the deep insight by the Sedei Yeshua, and a very good point. Now, tomorrow we're going to get into all sorts of cases about what happens when you don't wash the meal the right way for Netilat Yadayim or Mayim Achronim, and how important it is for Netilat Yadayim, and how important it is to wash the right way, and how to do it. We're going to get into more tomorrow about how we're going to do Netilat Yadayim, and that will finish up the Halacha. And one of the deep ideas is that we're doing this to create this fence so that we have a tradition that's preserved, so that when the temple is rebuilt, there'll be some semblance of preservation, so that we can start to eat holy food, because we'll know to wash our hands and things like that. So we want to learn how to do it the right way, and we're going to cover that in part 2 of this shiur. Have a great day.